All right, so today we're diving into something that might seem, I don't know, a little bit daunting at first glance. Estate planning and inheritance laws around the world. Now, you might be thinking as expats, why should I care about what happens in some, country halfway across the globe?
hmm
But trust me, this is going to get really interesting for anyone with assets in multiple countries.
Yeah, particularly those thinking about Asia.
Yeah, especially Asia, exactly.
A lot of our clients at Wealth Architects Global, they have what we call globalized financial lives, right?
Yeah.
You might have a business in one country, a vacation home in another, and investments spread across continents. And that means your estate plan needs to be just as globally minded.
It's like a puzzle, but the pieces are scattered across different countries, and then each country has its own set of rules. That sounds pretty complex.
It can be, but that's why we're here to, break it down. Let's start with something we all love to think about, taxes.
Okay, taxes, always a fun topic.
Right. But seriously, though, inheritance and estate taxes are one of the biggest pieces of this whole global estate planning puzzle. And the key thing to remember is that no two countries handle these taxes in the same way.
So it's like a global tax sampler platter.
Exactly. Some countries are quite welcoming, like Australia and New Zealand, no inheritance tax at all. But then you have other countries like the UK and the US, which have what's called a unified estate and gift tax system.
Okay, unified, what does that mean?
It means they look at both the assets you pass on when you die, ND, any large gifts that you give while you're still alive. It's like they're keeping tabs on everything you're giving away,
Wow.
even before you're gone.
So that's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about gifting any assets to family members now,
Right.
especially if those assets are in the US or the UK.
Absolutely. And speaking of things to keep in mind, let's talk about forced heirship.
Forced heirship, is that like when a country says, nope, you don't get to decide who inherits everything?
You got it. Some countries, especially in Europe and Asia, have these rules in place. It means that a portion of your estate is automatically guaranteed to certain family members, no matter what your will says.
So even if you have specific wishes, it's not necessarily going to be fully carried out in certain countries.
That's right. For instance, countries like France, Germany, Japan, even South Korea have some form of forced heirship rules. So if you have assets in those countries, it's essential to understand those rules because they can significantly impact how your estate is ultimately distributed.
It makes total sense. So we've got taxes, we've got forced heirship to consider. What else do we need to think about when we're navigating this global estate planning maze?
Well, here's where things get even more interesting. The rules that apply to you depend on a rather tricky distinction, domicile versus residence.
Okay, domicile versus residence. I'm guessing those aren't just fancy words for the same thing.
Not at all. They have very specific legal meanings, and they can be a real minefield when it comes to estate planning. Some countries, like the UK, have this complex statutory residence test to determine your tax residency. France, they consider domicile and residence to be essentially the same thing. And Austria, for example, they might consider you a resident for tax purposes if you simply have a home available for use there, even if you spend most of your time elsewhere.
So essentially, figuring out which country's rules actually apply to you is the first step in this whole process.
Exactly. It's crucial to understand your tax residency and domicile status in each country where you have assets or spend significant time. It's not always as straightforward as it might seem.
Okay, this is starting to feel a bit overwhelming. We've got taxes, we've got forced heirship, we've got the whole domicile versus residence puzzle. What else is there?
Well, even if you've sorted out your residency and domicile, there's still the issue of tax treaties.
Oh, right, those agreements between countries to avoid double taxation.
Exactly. And while they can be very helpful for income tax, they don't always cover inheritance taxes. This means you could end up paying taxes on the same assets twice if you're not careful.
Ouch, double taxation.
Especially if you have assets in both Asia and Europe.
That doesn't sound fun at all.
It's definitely something to avoid. And that's where careful planning and understanding the specifics of tax treaties come into play.
So we've got taxes, we've got forced heirship, we've got domicile versus residence, we've got tax treaties. I feel like we're just sort of scratching the surface here. Is there anything else our listeners should be thinking about before we move on?
Yes, so we need to talk about trusts. Trusts are a common tool for asset protection and succession planning, especially in countries like the UK, US, and Singapore.
Yeah, trusts, right? We talk about those a lot at Wealth Architects Global.
Yeah.
Especially for clients who are, interested in investing in Asia, for example. But I imagine the rules around trusts can be quite different depending on the country.
You're absolutely right. For example, Austria looks at a trust's transparency to determine how it's taxed. France has specific rules for trusts, and even a similar structure called a fiducie. And in the Netherlands, private purpose funds, which include trusts, have their own set of tax rules.
So even though trust can be this really powerful tool, it's important to understand the specific rules of each country that's involved. It sounds like a lot to keep track of.
It can be, but that's why it's so important to have expert guidance. Let's make this a little bit more concrete with a few specific examples. I think these will be particularly relevant for those of you with assets in Asia, Europe, or Australia.
Okay, let's hear it. Examples always help to bring things to life.
So let's start with Belgium. A lot of our clients are interested in Belgium for its strategic location in Europe. If you're thinking about passing down a family business in Belgium, the Flemish region offers a potentially attractive option. They have a reduced inheritance tax rate as low as 3% for transfers to close family members.
That's a pretty significant benefit.
It is, especially when you compare it to the inheritance tax rates in other countries.
What other examples come to mind?
Let's hop over to Chile. If you own any property in Chile, you need to be aware of their unique valuation methods for inheritance tax purposes.
Unique. What do you mean?
Well, instead of using the market value, they use the Chilean tax authority's appraisal, which could be significantly different from what you might expect.
So it's not just about the tax rate. It's also about how they determine the value of your assets.
Exactly. And that can have a big impact on your overall tax liability.
Okay, Belgium, Chile, noted. Any other countries we should be thinking about?
Let's not forget about France. France has a lot to offer, but it also comes with a unique set of rules. For instance, they have an annual 3% tax on the market value of real estate held by both residents and non-residents.
So even if you don't live in France, you could still be subject to this tax if you own property there.
That's right. And there's no deduction for any debt you might have on the property, so it's essential to factor this ongoing cost into your financial planning.
France, got it. What about Germany?
Germany has a really fascinating approach to inheritance tax, particularly when it comes to businesses. If you inherit or receive a business as a gift and you meet certain conditions, you might qualify for a substantial tax exemption. We're talking 85%, or even a full 100% exemption in some cases.
Wow, 100% tax exemption. That sounds almost too good to be true. What are the conditions?
It essentially boils down to holding on to the business for a specified number of years and maintaining a certain level of employment. To get the 85% exemption, you need to keep the business running for 5 years and ensure your wage costs are 4 times the average of the 5 years before inheriting the business. For the full 100% exemption, it's 7 years and 7 times the wage costs. It's a smart way to encourage business continuity and protect jobs.
So Germany definitely has some incentives in place for keeping businesses thriving.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about Japan. Japan has some of the highest inheritance tax rates globally, reaching up to 48%. But there is a silver lining. Spouses are exempt from tax on their statutory share of the estate.
Okay, so some relief for spouses in Japan. What about for those who are thinking about making gifts while they're still alive? Any interesting examples for them?
Luxembourg has a unique approach to gift giving. If you're considering making a gift there, think about doing it through a marriage contract or in anticipation of marriage. This can actually reduce the tax rate.
So it's not just about what you give, but also the timing and the context of the gift.
Exactly. It all comes down to understanding the nuances of each country's rules. And for our final example, let's look at Mexico. While donating property might seem like a generous gesture, it's crucial to understand the specific rules there.
What do we need to watch out for in Mexico?
Well, if you donate your entire property in Mexico and you don't retain enough assets to live on, the donation could actually be nullified.
Whoa. That's a pretty important detail to know. It's like every country has its own, quirks and nuances when it comes to estate planning.
Absolutely. And that's precisely why it's so crucial to get expert advice tailored to your specific situation, especially as a global citizen. It really highlights why we always say at Wealth Architects Global, don't just focus on the what, understand the why.
No.
When it comes to international estate planning, knowing the rules is only half the battle, You need to understand the reasoning behind them to really make informed decisions.
Unpack that for me a little bit.
Yeah.
So you're saying knowing the tax rate in France isn't enough. I also need to know why France has that tax in the first place.
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture. Like, why do you think some countries have these forced heirship rules? Often it's rooted in cultural values and a desire to protect family member, spouses and children especially. It's not just about tax revenue. It's about, social and familial considerations as well.
So it's about understanding the cultural and historical context behind these laws,
Yeah,
so we can better anticipate potential challenges and make smarter decisions.
precisely. Let's take pre-immigration planning as a real-world example. Many of our clients at Wealth Architects Global are expats who've moved maybe even multiple times across continents.
Right.
And they might have assets in their original home country, assets in their new country of residence, and then additional investments in places like, Singapore or Hong Kong.
Right, and it gets complicated very quickly.
It certainly does. And this is where understanding the why becomes absolutely crucial. Let's say you're moving from the UK to Singapore. You need to understand how becoming a Singapore resident will impact you from a tax perspective, of
Yeah.
course, but you also need to consider what happens to any trusts you might have set up in the UK
Right.
and how the Singaporean tax authorities might view those.
So it's not just about following the rules of one country in isolation. It's about understanding how all of these different countries' rules might interact and potentially clash.
You got it. It's like a game of chess where the board is constantly shifting, and you need to be thinking several moves ahead.
This is where I'm really glad I have experts like you to help me navigate this. But seriously, for our listeners who are feeling a little overwhelmed right now, what's the key takeaway they should be focusing on?
I'd say don't panic. The most important thing is to start the estate planning process early, especially if you're living and working in different countries. The sooner you start, the more options you'll have,
Yeah.
and the better prepared you'll be to handle these complexities.
Great advice. And I think that leads perfectly into our next topic, practical steps that our expats can take right now to get started with their international estate planning journey. What are some action items they can tackle today?
First things first, get organized. Create a comprehensive inventory of all your assets.
Right.
This includes everything.
Mm.
Bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate, even those digital assets like cryptocurrency.
So it's like mapping out your global treasure chest. We need to know where all the gold doubloons are buried before we can start, dividing them up.
Exactly. Make sure you document where each asset is located, who holds the title, and any relevant account information. This will be invaluable for your heirs later on.
Okay. Inventory is step one. What's next?
Take a look at any existing estate planning documents you might already have. Do you have a will, a trust, powers of attorney? If so, make sure they are up to date and accurately reflect your current circumstances.
And I imagine it's important to remember that documents drafted in one country might not be valid or enforceable in another country, right?
Absolutely. The legal requirements for estate planning documents can vary significantly from one country to another, so it's crucial to have those documents reviewed by an expert who understands international estate planning, especially if you've moved countries since those documents were originally drafted.
So don't assume that a will you created in Australia will automatically hold up in France or the US.
Exactly. It's always best to err on the side of caution and get professional advice.
Okay, so we've got our inventory, we've reviewed our existing documents. What's the next step on this global estate planning checklist?
Now it's time to think about your beneficiaries. Who do you want to inherit your assets? And in what proportions? Do you have specific wishes about charitable donations? Or how a family business should be managed after you're gone? This is where you start to shape your legacy.
Right, and I imagine those forced heirship rules that we discussed earlier can really come into play at this stage. It's not always entirely up to you who receives what, especially if you have assets in countries with those rules.
That's exactly right. You need to understand those rules and how they might impact your wishes, even if those wishes are clearly stated in your will.
Got it. So we've mapped out our assets, we've reviewed our documents, and we've given some thought to our beneficiaries. What's the final step?
This is where it all comes together. Consult with an experienced international estate planning professional.
Okay.
They can help you untangle the complexities of international laws, navigate those tricky tax treaties, and utilize sophisticated estate planning tools like trusts and foundations.
It sounds like having a skilled architect to design your financial legacy. They can help build a structure that's solid, secure, and reflects your unique vision and goals.
That's a great analogy. And that's precisely what we strive to do here at Wealth Architects Global. We help our clients create bespoke blueprints for their financial futures, no matter where in the world they might be.
That's great to hear. So for our listeners who are ready to take charge of their international estate planning, reach out to us at Wealth Architects Global. We're here to help you build a legacy that lasts.
Absolutely. And here's a final thought to ponder as we wrap up today's deep dive. While minimizing taxes is certainly important, it shouldn't be your only focus. Think about your values, your family's needs, and your long-term goals. Crafting an estate plan that truly reflects your unique situation is the real key to a successful legacy, no matter where life takes you.
We've been on quite a journey today, unpacking this whole world of international estate planning. It's definitely complex, but hopefully we've given you some valuable insights and practical steps to start thinking about your own legacy.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that estate planning isn't just about minimizing taxes, right? It's about aligning your assets with your values and making sure that your wishes are carried out according to your intentions.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. So for our listeners who are ready to take action, what are some practical steps that they can take right now?
Well, first and foremost, get organized. Create a comprehensive inventory of all your assets. This includes bank accounts, investments, property, even those digital assets like cryptocurrency.
Right, it's like taking stock of your global treasure map. You need to know where everything is before you start dividing it up.
Precisely. And make sure you document where these assets are located, who holds title to them, and any relevant account information. This will be invaluable for your heirs later on.
Okay, inventory step one. What's next?
Review your existing estate planning documents. If you have a will, a trust, powers of attorney, make sure they're up to date. Make sure they reflect your current circumstances. And remember, these documents might have been drafted under the laws of a different country, so it's really crucial to get them reviewed by an expert who understands international estate planning.
So don't assume that a will you drafted in the U.S. will automatically hold up in Singapore or the UK.
Exactly. The rules and requirements can vary so much.
Okay, so we've got inventory, review existing documents. What else?
Think about your beneficiaries. Who do you want to inherit your assets, and in what proportions? Do you have any specific wishes regarding charitable donations or the management of a family business? This is where you really start to shape your legacy.
Right, and this is where those forced heirship rules that we discussed earlier can really come into play. You might have certain family members who are automatically entitled to a portion of your estate, regardless of what your personal wishes are.
Absolutely. It's important to understand those rules and factor them into your planning.
Okay, so we've got our assets mapped out, our documents reviewed, and we've got our beneficiaries in mind. What's the final step?
This is where it all comes together. Consult with an experienced international estate planning professional. They can help you navigate those complexities, those tax treaties, and utilize sophisticated estate planning tools like trusts and foundations.
It's like having a skilled architect, right, to design your financial legacy. They can help you build a structure that's solid, secure, and really reflects your unique vision.
That's a great way to put it. And that's exactly what we do here at Wealth Architects.
Wonderful. Well, for our listeners who are ready to take control of their international estate planning, reach out to us at Wealth Architects Global. We're here to help you build a legacy that lasts.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into international estate planning.
Until next time.